The debate hall was tense even before it began. Cameras rolled, the audience leaned forward, and the atmosphere pulsed with the energy of two fierce minds about to collide. Mark Levin, the conservative commentator known for his fiery rhetoric, and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, celebrated for her sharp intellect and fearless comebacks. Mark leaned toward his mic first, his voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. Mark Levin, you know, Congresswoman Crockett, I've read your speeches, and I've heard you talk about the law as if you've rewritten the Constitution yourself. But tell me, what kind of law school teaches emotion over logic, outrage over order? Because from what I've seen, your degree seems to specialize in courtroom theatrics, not constitutional understanding. A ripple of murmurs swept across the crowd. Crockett's expression didn't flinch. She waited, patient, deliberate, letting his words hang heavy before she answered. Jasmine Crockett, Mark, you've made a career out of talking over people and calling it intellect. But let's get something straight. I didn't earn my law degree to impress commentators like you. I earned it to defend those who can't afford your version of justice, the one that silences, mocks, and dismisses. My education wasn't about showmanship, it was about service. Something you talk about but rarely practice. Her words hit with precision, measured and cold. The audience stirred, the silence broke into scattered applause. Mark Levin, oh, please, spare me the sermon. You call it service, I call it political theater. You use emotion as a weapon, outrage as your argument. When was the last time you actually cited a legal precedent instead of playing the victim card? Jasmine Crockett, precedent. Let's talk precedent. Mark. Brown v. Board of Education, Miranda Zona. Gideon v. Wainwright. Cases fought and won by lawyers who believed in equality and fairness, not media ratings. You belittle that legacy every time you equate passion for justice with weakness. If you call empathy emotional, then maybe that's what your kind of law has been missing all along. The audience fell quiet again. This time, not from tension but respect. Mark leaned back slightly, his jaw tightening. Mark Levin, so you're telling me shouting slogans and chasing cameras is your version of justice? The Constitution isn't built on feelings. It's built on order, something your party seems to forget. Jasmine Crockett, and order without conscience is tyranny. The Constitution wasn't written to protect power. It was written to protect people. You keep quoting it like scripture, but you forget the human lives behind every amendment. When I fight in Congress, I'm not chasing cameras, Mark. I'm chasing accountability. And if that makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's because truth sounds louder than talk. The moderator tried to interject, but the energy in the room had already shifted. The audience was hanging on every word. Mark Levin, you sound like a preacher trying to rewrite the founding principles. Maybe you should reread Federalist Paper No. 10. Madison warned against factions driven by emotion and self-interest. That's what you represent. Jasmine Crockett, no, what I represent is evolution. The founders wrote for their time. We legislate for ours. America isn't frozen in parchment. It's living, breathing, and flawed. You treat the Constitution like a museum exhibit. I treat it like a living document that demands justice for today's citizens, not just those of 1787. A smattering of applause erupted from one corner of the room, then spread like wildfire. Mark's expression hardened, his smirk fading. Mark Levin, you see, that's your problem. You think passion substitutes for wisdom. You think loudness equals leadership. Jasmine Crockett, and you think cynicism equals intellect. You've mistaken cruelty for candor. The louder you mocked, the smaller your argument becomes. I've stood in real courtrooms, with real people whose lives depended on the law you dismiss as a talking point. My degree wasn't for show, Mark. It was earned, word by word, case by case, through the kind of truth you can't shout over. A hush settled again. The kind that didn't need applause to make its point. Mark leaned closer to the mic one last time, his tone slightly softer. Mark Levin, you've got fire, I'll give you that. But emotion burns fast, principles last, Jasmine Crockett. And without fire, principles freeze. The law isn't supposed to be cold, Mark. It's supposed to protect the warmth of humanity. That's the difference between quoting justice and practicing it. For the first time all night, Mark didn't respond. He simply nodded, a rare gesture of acknowledgement. The audience, sensing the unspoken truce between conviction and truth, rose to its feet in quiet applause. Jasmine sat back, calm and unshaken, her eyes steady as if to say, you can mock the degree, but you can't diminish the purpose behind it. The applause faded, leaving behind a charged silence that buzzed in the air. The cameras zoomed in. Mark Levin and Jasmine Crockett sat across from each other, two opposing worlds bridged by one word: justice. The moderator cleared his throat and spoke softly. Let's move to our next question. What truly defines justice? Is it law or morality? The question hovered like smoke, and Mark was the first to seize it. Mark Levin: justice, Congresswoman, isn't an emotion to be felt, it's a structure to be upheld. You don't get to twist it to fit your worldview. The law is justice, or at least the closest human beings can come to it. Without the rule of law, morality becomes chaos. One person's good becomes another's grievance. That's why we have statutes, codes, and courts, to separate principle from passion. He spoke like a man standing in a courtroom of history itself, voice booming with certainty. Mark Levin as continuing. If every politician started legislating based on what they feel is moral, the entire republic would collapse under self-righteousness. The founders didn't design a moral monarchy, they designed a legal democracy. Justice is blind for a reason. The crowd murmured in agreement, some nodding, others waiting for the inevitable storm from the other side of the table. Crockett leaned forward, her gaze firm, but her tone controlled. Jasmine Crockett: blind, yes, but not heartless. You keep talking about law like it's divine scripture, Mark, untouchable, unquestionable. But tell me this: who writes the law? Humans. Who interprets it? Humans. And humans are imperfect. If morality doesn't guide law, then law becomes a shield for injustice. Her voice grew stronger with each word. Jasmine Crockett: if law alone defined justice, then slavery was once justice, segregation was once justice, women being denied the right to vote was once justice. The law has failed morality before, and it will again, unless people like us question it. A hush swept through the hall. Even those who disagreed couldn't deny the weight of her argument. Mark sat back, eyes narrowing, not with anger, but focus. Mark Levin: that's a cheap trick, dragging out ancient sins to justify present chaos. Yes, the law evolves, but it evolves through order, not rebellion. The Constitution already built the mechanism for change: amendments, courts, debates. You don't get to throw out the entire structure because it once faltered. That's not reform, that's arrogance. Jasmine Crockett: and ignoring its faults isn't order, it's cowardice. You talk about evolution as if it happens naturally, but it doesn't. It takes courage, conflict, and yes, emotion. Without moral outrage, there would have been no Civil Rights Act. Without protest, no Voting Rights Act. Without empathy, no progress. Her words crackled in the air like fire meeting steel. Mark leaned in, voice low but sharp. Mark Levin: and yet those laws you praise, they came through the system, not outside it. Through the courts, through legal argument. Morality alone didn't make them real. The law did. That's the difference between an activist and a jurist. The jurist argues the Constitution. The activist argues feelings. Jasmine Crockett: then call me an activist because feelings built this nation too. The law didn't declare independence, courage did. The law didn't march in Selma, conscience did. The law didn't sit in at lunch counters, people with moral fire did. The law may record justice, but morality creates it. A slow, thunderous applause began to rise. Mark's brow furrowed. He wasn't used to being outpaced in rhythm. But he wasn't finished. Mark Levin: you sound poetic, but governance isn't poetry. When morality takes precedence over law, you end up with mob rule. Look around: every protest that turns violent, every policy driven by outrage rather than reason. That's morality unrestrained. It's dangerous. Jasmine Crockett: and law without morality is tyranny with paperwork. You can write oppression into a statute and call it order. But that doesn't make it just. Justice isn't a machine. It's a mirror. It reflects who we are. And right now, that reflection needs cleaning. The audience gasped, not at her defiance, but at her eloquence. Mark tapped his notes, his tone lowering into a colder, more deliberate rhythm. Mark Levin: you and I both know the courts exist for a reason. Emotion can't be cross-examined. The law doesn't care how you feel about a verdict. It cares whether the evidence holds. That's justice: impartial, dispassionate, fair. Jasmine Crockett: fair. Tell that to the people who can't afford representation. Tell that to the wrongfully convicted. Tell that to those who sit in prison because justice is priced by privilege. The system you worship doesn't treat everyone equally, it treats power favorably. You call it impartial, I call it indifferent. Her words sliced the air clean. Mark paused, for the first time truly taken aback. Mark Levin: So your solution is what? Rewriting the law based on who cries loudest? Jasmine Crockett: no. My solution is listening to those the law silences. Justice doesn't mean we all get the same treatment, it means we all get the same chance. And until that happens, the law isn't done evolving. The crowd erupted in applause, loud, sustained, emotional. Mark waited, then raised a hand, his tone soft but defiant. Mark Levin: you make passion sound like a policy. But passion fades. The Constitution doesn't. That's what protects us, permanence. If every generation rewrites justice based on emotion, then justice has no anchor. Jasmine Crockett: and if every generation refuses to question injustice, then that anchor becomes a chain. The founders didn't write the Constitution to be worshipped. They wrote it to be used. And using it means improving it. That's not rebellion, Mark, that's responsibility. The audience leaned in. The two figures, Levin and Crockett, were now less opponents and more embodiments of two ideologies: order vs. conscience, law vs. morality, tradition vs. progress. Mark's final words came measured, almost reflective. Mark Levin: maybe. But one day when passion cools and order must return, even you will look to the law for stability. Crockett smiled faintly, a quiet, knowing smile. Jasmine Crockett: and when that day comes, I hope the law remembers the fire that made it just. The crowd stood, a slow rising ovation that filled the chamber. Cameras flashed. The debate had ended, but something deeper had begun. A dialogue echoing beyond that room, into the heart of every listener. What truly defines justice, the letter of the law, or the spirit of humanity? The applause rolled like distant thunder before fading into a sharp silence. The air inside the debate hall felt heavier now, charged not with anger, but with curiosity. Both Mark Levin and Jasmine Crockett sat poised, their eyes fixed on each other. It was no longer just a clash of ideologies, it had become something deeper, a test of who truly spoke for the American conscience. The moderator, visibly caught between admiration and tension, cleared his throat. Tonight's final question, he said slowly, asks what might be the heart of this debate: does the court serve the people? Or does it protect the powerful? The question dropped like a gavel. The audience hushed completely. Mark Levin was first to respond, his tone deliberate and cool, his every word measured like a legal clause. Mark Levin: the court, Congresswoman, serves the law. That's the only way it can serve the people. The moment we turn courts into instruments of populism, or worse, political activism, we destroy their integrity. The law doesn't bend to emotion, to wealth, or to pressure. It stands on precedent. That's what protects every citizen, rich or poor. He paused, eyes scanning the audience. Mark Levin: you accuse the system of protecting the powerful. I say it protects civilization. The powerful only have influence until the gavel drops, then the law speaks, and all stand equal beneath it. The words sounded noble, but the murmurs from the audience showed not everyone agreed. Crockett waited a heartbeat, then spoke. Jasmine Crockett: equal beneath it, you say, maybe in theory. But in practice, the powerful walk free with settlements. The poor serve time for survival. Justice doesn't weigh the same for everyone, not when one side can afford to buy the scales. A stir swept through the room. She didn't raise her voice, yet her tone carried the kind of power that silences applause before it starts. Jasmine Crockett: I've stood in courtrooms, Mark. Not the marble halls of theory, but real rooms, with mothers crying over sons they couldn't afford to defend. I've seen judges show mercy to men in suits and sentences to boys in hoodies. So don't tell me the law treats everyone equal. The words may be blind, but the system isn't. Her words echoed, raw, unfiltered, cutting through the polished air of debate. Mark adjusted his glasses, his expression tightening. Mark Levin: you make it sound like conspiracy. There are flaws, I'll admit that, but corruption is the exception, not the rule. You can't condemn the entire judiciary because of a few bad judges or unfair cases. The structure is still sound. Jasmine Crockett: and when that structure protects those bad judges, when it silences victims instead of listening to them, then the problem isn't a crack, it's a foundation issue. You don't fix that with patchwork, you rebuild it with accountability. Mark's tone sharpened, the warmth fading. Mark Levin: accountability, yes. But your version of it sounds a lot like vengeance. Every time a verdict doesn't align with your worldview, you call it bias. Every time a decision challenges your politics, you call it corruption. That's not justice. That's ideology dressed as fairness. Crockett leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. Jasmine Crockett: and your version of fairness is silence. You defend the system even when it fails, because admitting fault threatens your comfort. But justice isn't about comfort. It's about courage. And sometimes courage means calling the powerful to account. She paused, letting the words breathe. Jasmine Crockett. Tell me, Mark, when was the last time you saw a billionaire in handcuffs on the evening news? When was the last time a corporation faced the same sentence as the man who stole bread to feed his family? The law isn't blind, it just chooses who it looks away from. The audience murmured in agreement. Mark straightened, his tone now almost solemn. Mark Levin, I understand the frustration. But if you destroy faith in the system, you destroy the nation. The law can't survive if every loss turns into a claim of injustice. Power has always existed, it's human nature. The law keeps it from consuming everything. Jasmine Crockett, no, Mark. The people keep it from consuming everything. The law only has power because we give it meaning. And when the powerful manipulate it, it's up to the people to take it back. Courts should serve the citizen, not the CEO. The debate grew electric, the audience hanging between applause and reflection. Mark Levin, you sound like a revolutionary. Jasmine Crockett, maybe I am, but revolutions don't always mean riots. Sometimes they mean reform. You can respect the law and still demand it do better. Mark crossed his arms, looking at her with an expression halfway between irritation and reluctant admiration. Mark Levin, you have passion, I'll grant you that. But passion without restraint leads to chaos. You can't have a court that bends every time public opinion shifts. Jasmine Crockett. And you can't have a court that stands still while injustice moves faster. Justice shouldn't be a monument. It should be emotion. A living thing that grows with the people it serves. The room broke into applause again. This time stronger, longer. Mark waited it out, his tone softening as he spoke again. Mark Levin, you believe the system protects the powerful. I believe it protects the republic. Maybe we're both right, and both wrong. But if you destroy faith in the law, you invite something worse, lawlessness. And that's when real power, the dangerous kind, takes over. Jasmine Crockett, faith without truth is worship. I don't want people to worship the law. I want them to trust it. And that trust only comes when justice is consistent, not conditional on wealth or status. A beat passed, silence again. Even the cameras seemed to pause their quiet hum. Mark's next words were slower, almost reflective. Mark Levin, you know, I used to believe justice was just a formula. Evidence. Logic, verdict. But maybe it's also about how people feel when it's done. Maybe justice isn't just delivered, it's experienced. Crockett smiled faintly. Jasmine Crockett, exactly. Justice isn't paperwork, it's peace of mind. It's not enough for the court to rule fairly, it has to be felt as fair. Otherwise, the system loses its soul. The crowd erupted, not in frenzy but in reverence. Two ideologies had clashed and somehow found a sliver of shared truth. The moderator, his voice soft and steady, concluded, perhaps tonight we've learned that justice isn't about sides, it's about balance. Between law and morality, between truth and power. Mark looked toward Jasmine, nodding slightly. She returned the gesture. No handshake, no dramatic bow, just mutual respect. As the lights dimmed and cameras faded, one truth lingered in the air. The debate may have ended, but the conversation about justice had only just begun. The studio lights dimmed again a week later. Same city, same stage, but the energy was different. The last debate had gone viral, replayed across networks, dissected on every talk show. Tonight, it wasn't just another discussion, it was an event. The audience packed the hall, restless with anticipation. Cameras panned across faces filled with curiosity and tension. At center stage sat Mark Levin, crisp, collected, his papers stacked like evidence. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett, calm but fierce, her confidence as unshakable as ever. The moderator spoke softly into the charged air, welcome back, America. Tonight, we ask the question that echoes through every courtroom and Congress hall. Can truth survive politics? The silence that followed was almost reverent. Mark Levin adjusted his mic, his voice steady and cold. Mark Levin, truth doesn't need to survive politics, it defines it. The problem today isn't that truth is under attack, it's that too many confuse opinion for truth. Every politician with a camera wants to rewrite facts to fit their narrative. Truth isn't emotional, it's evidence, logic, and law. You don't debate it, you defend it. He glanced across the table at Crockett. Mark Levin, you talk about justice and morality, Congresswoman. But what happens when your version of truth conflicts with mine? That's the danger. When truth becomes relative, the republic collapses under perception. Politics should serve truth, not manufacture it. His voice carried command, but beneath it, something else lingered: frustration. Crockett leaned forward, eyes sharp, voice clear. Jasmine Crockett, Mark, I wish truth were as clean as you make it sound. But truth doesn't exist in a vacuum, it lives in people, and people live in politics. You can't separate the two. The danger isn't that truth is emotional, it's that power decides whose truth gets believed. The audience shifted, murmuring. The debate had barely begun, yet the tension was already climbing. Jasmine Crockett, every day, we see truths buried because they threaten someone's career or corporation. We see whistleblowers punished, facts twisted into headlines, justice traded for votes. So don't tell me truth defines politics. Too often politics defines truth. Mark leaned forward, eyes flashing. Mark Levin, then your solution is what? Moral chaos. Every politician claiming their truth. That's not democracy, that's delusion. Facts don't bend to feeling. There's one truth, and it's found in reason, not rhetoric. Jasmine Crockett, reason? Whose reason, Mark? The one that justifies corruption. The one that silences protest in the name of order. Don't pretend reason is neutral when it's often wielded as a weapon by those already in power. Her words hit like steady blows, calm but cutting. Jasmine Crockett. Truth isn't owned by the loudest voice or the longest resume. It's found in the lived reality of people who don't get airtime. The worker fired for speaking up. The family evicted while corporations get tax breaks. The citizen who votes but feels invisible. Their truth may not fit in your framework, but it's no less real. Mark's jaw tightened. Mark Levin, you sound like you're describing grievance, not truth. There's a difference. The law doesn't serve feelings, it serves facts. Jasmine Crockett, and when facts are chosen to fit power, feelings become the only truth left. The audience gasped, the words landed heavy. Mark sat back, shaking his head. Mark Levin, you see. That's the problem with modern politics. Everyone's a victim, everyone's got a version of their truth. But truth isn't plural. There's one set of facts, and the courts, not Congress or the crowd, decide what stands. Crockett smiled faintly, her tone calm but laced with conviction. Jasmine Crockett, courts can rule, but conscience decides what's right. You can declare something legal and still have it be wrong. History proves that. And you, Mark, as a man of law, should know, legality and morality don't always walk hand in hand. Mark frowned, eyes narrowing. Mark Levin, so what, you want the courts to start ruling based on morality now? That's dangerous. One judge's conscience is another man's tyranny. Jasmine Crockett, no. I want truth to stop being filtered through political convenience. I want facts to be honored even when they hurt your side. That's the real danger, Mark, not morality but selective honesty. Her tone softened slightly. Jasmine Crockett, truth can survive lies, it can survive debate. What it can't survive is silence. The audience stirred again. Slow, approving murmurs spread through the crowd. Mark looked down at his notes, then up again, his voice lower, steadier. Mark Levin, you talk like truth is fragile, like it needs rescuing. But truth doesn't need anyone's permission. It stands whether people believe it or not. The problem is, politicians use the word truth like a brand, to sell their version of justice. Jasmine Crockett. And commentators use it to sell ratings. The line drew laughter. Short, sharp and honest. Even Mark cracked a reluctant smile. Jasmine Crockett, the truth isn't dying, Mark, it's just drowning in noise. And the louder politics gets, the harder it is for the truth to breathe. Mark nodded slightly, almost conceding the metaphor, then leaned forward. Mark Levin. Then maybe the answer isn't louder politics. Maybe it's quieter citizens. People need to think before they react. We live in a time where outrage travels faster than fact. Everyone's more interested in being right than getting it right. Crockett's eyes softened. She agreed more than she wanted to admit. Jasmine Crockett. You're right about that. But people react because they feel unheard. When truth gets buried under bureaucracy and power, outrage becomes the only language left. She paused, letting the words rest. Jasmine Crockett, truth doesn't die because people lie. It dies because people stop listening. The moderator glanced up, sensing the rare shift, no longer attack and defense but reflection. Mark sighed lightly, his tone losing its edge. Mark Levin. Maybe we both see truth from different sides of the same wall. You think it's buried by power, I think it's blurred by politics. Either way, it's being suffocated. Jasmine Crockett. Then maybe the job isn't to win the argument. It's to break the wall. That line drew applause. Not thunderous, but meaningful. The kind that starts slow, builds, and carries weight. Mark looked at her for a long moment, then spoke softly. Mark Levin, you know, Crockett, I may not agree with your methods, but I respect your fight. Maybe truth can survive politics if people still care enough to argue for it. Crockett smiled, not triumphant, but genuine. Jasmine Crockett, argue for it, not own it. That's the difference. The audience rose, applause swelling like a final verdict. No winner, no loser, just two opposing forces that had, for a fleeting moment, met in understanding. As the lights dimmed and the credits rolled, the narrator's voice might have said, if there had been one truth isn't destroyed by disagreement. It dies when debate becomes theater and conviction becomes currency. And tonight, in this room, truth survived, not because it was protected, but because it was challenged. The debate ended, but the noise didn't. Clips flooded social media, snippets, sound bites, and out-of-context captions screaming for clicks. One headline read, Crockett destroys Levin on live TV. Another shouted, Levin schools radical Congresswoman. Two people, one debate, and 1,000 versions of truth. In the quiet hours after the broadcast, the studio stood empty. The bright lights had dimmed, replaced by the low hum of cleaning crews and the soft flicker of screens replaying highlights. Mark Levin sat alone at the moderator's table, his notes still neatly stacked, untouched since the final applause. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett lingered by the exit, coat over her arm, expression unreadable. She wasn't basking in victory or bitterness, just thought. For a moment, the air between them carried the echo of everything said and unsaid. Mark finally broke the silence. Mark Levin, you know, it's strange. 2 hours of debate, and I'm still not sure if we were arguing about justice or human nature. Crockett turned, the corner of her mouth curving into a faint, tired smile. Jasmine Crockett, maybe both. Justice is just human nature with rules. Mark chuckled, the first real laugh of the night. Mark Levin, you've got a way with words. You should have been a writer. Jasmine Crockett, and you should have been a judge. The tension softened, replaced by something quieter, mutual respect wrapped in exhaustion. They sat, not as combatants but as thinkers, opposite sides of the same weary table. Mark Levin, tell me honestly, Crockett, do you ever get tired of it? The constant battle. Every word you say dissected, twisted, turned into ammunition. Crockett exhaled slowly. Jasmine Crockett, every day. But I'd rather be misquoted fighting for something real than be silent and comfortable in nothing. Mark nodded slowly, his gaze distant. Mark Levin, you know, the hardest thing about speaking truth in this country isn't the backlash. It's realizing half the people cheering you on aren't listening. They're just choosing sides. Jasmine Crockett, exactly. They don't want truth. They want confirmation. They want to win. The hum of the studio lights filled the silence between them. Two voices from opposite ideologies realizing how similar the burden felt. Mark rubbed his temples, the years of argument and airtime heavy on his shoulders. Mark Levin, when I started out, I thought debate was about clarity, that if you made a strong enough case, people would see reason. But now it's about noise. Whoever shouts last wins the clip, Jasmine Crockett, and whoever stays calm gets called weak. I know that game too. She looked toward the empty seats where the audience had once sat, where applause had echoed like thunder. Jasmine Crockett, you know what's sad, Mark? Somewhere between your logic and my fire, there's actual truth, but it never makes it past the cameras. Mark smiled faintly. Mark Levin, maybe it's because truth doesn't sell. Jasmine Crockett, no it does. Just not in one piece. They both laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that comes after a long argument, when fatigue melts pride. Then Mark's expression turned serious. Mark Levin, when I mocked your law degree that night, the first debate, I'll admit I did it for reaction, for the crowd. But I underestimated you. Crockett looked at him. Not with bitterness but clarity. Jasmine Crockett, I know, that's politics, right? Everyone's performing for someone. Mark Levin, not everyone. You weren't performing. Her eyes softened. There was no need for thanks. She knew what that acknowledgement cost him. Jasmine Crockett, you know, for all your talk about order and structure, you've got a rebel streak in you too. Mark chuckled again, shaking his head. Mark Levin, maybe. I just rebel differently. I fight for the rules. You fight to change them. Jasmine Crockett, either way, we're both fighting to be heard. Silence again. But this one wasn't heavy. It was the kind that feels like understanding. Outside, the night rain began to tap softly against the glass walls. The world beyond was still divided, online arguments raging, hashtags trending, networks spinning. But in that empty room, the noise couldn't reach them. Jasmine Crockett, Mark, do you ever wonder if truth even stands a chance anymore? Between algorithms, spin rooms, and outrage, can it survive? Mark leaned back, thinking, his voice low. Mark Levin, truth doesn't die, it just hides. Every generation has to go looking for it again. Maybe that's what keeps democracy alive, the search itself. Jasmine Crockett, so the fight never ends. Mark Levin, it's not supposed to. Crockett smiled faintly. Jasmine Crockett, then I guess we'll see each other in the next round. Mark extended his hand. A rare gesture, quiet and sincere. She shook it firm but warm. Mark Levin, next time, maybe we start from the same question instead of opposite answers. Jasmine Crockett. That'd be a nice change. They stood, gathering their notes, their armor for the next public war. But for that fleeting moment, there was peace, two rivals who understood the cost of conviction. As Crockett turned to leave, Mark called after her. Mark Levin, you said truth dies in silence. Maybe you're right. Maybe that's why people like us can't shut up. Crockett laughed, looking back over her shoulder. Jasmine Crockett, then keep talking, Mark. Just make sure you're still listening. And then she was gone. Her footsteps fading down the hall, leaving only the faint hum of the monitors replaying their words. Mark sat back one last time, staring at the empty debate stage. The same place that had witnessed fire, conflict, pride, and, strangely enough, understanding. He whispered to no one in particular, Mark Levin, truth survives not because it's easy, but because someone keeps saying it, even when no one wants to hear. The screen flickered to black, but the echoes remained. Not the applause, not the shouting, just two voices, different, defiant, and still daring to believe that truth, battered as it was, could still survive the storm. Epilogue, a narrative noted by morning. Clips of their final handshake spread across social media. No shouting, no insults, just a quiet moment between ideological opposites. Some mocked it as weakness, some called it hope. But those who listened, really listened, heard something rare, a reminder that even in a divided nation, truth doesn't belong to one side. It belongs to whoever has the courage to speak, and the humility to hear.